Hello, valued viewers. When I set out to make this channel, I tried to make it as apolitical as possible. However, I cannot simply stand by and watch as this situation continues to unfold. I want this video to serve both as a philosophy final project, but also as a refutational video on the stuff that I've been hearing online with regards to Ukraine. So, with that in mind, let us begin. Deontological ethics, rooted in the philosophy of a certain Mr. Immanuel Kant, assesses the morality of actions based on adherence to duty and moral rules, irrespective of their outcomes. Even if we look at it from this standpoint, it's clear as day that Russia's invasion of Ukraine is seen as completely and utterly reprehensible, to encroach on the sovereign territory of another nation. And Ukraine's continued resistance is simply them exercising the right to resist this invasion. Hence, the resistance to this invasion is therefore ethical, contrary to what the Vatniks may tell you. We often forget in this dog-eat-dog world of the internet that it was, in fact, Russia that invaded, under the false pretense of freeing Ukraine of the Nazi Empire. What Nazi Empire? In fact, let us analyze the Nazi Empire claim, because I do see this quite a lot on X, formerly Twitter. Let's also talk about categorical imperative, acting only on maxims that would... Now, in this way, the study of information and gathering information in terms of Ukraine leads to epistemology, the study of knowledge. So, epistemology asks of what can we know and how do we know it. Good research, in this case, applying it to Ukraine, does the same. It's about finding reliable, well-supported information. How do you do that? Consult multiple sources, and testing whether beliefs or claims are justified. This is exactly what epistemology, one of the central branches of philosophy, deals with. For example, because I need to put an example in this, a philosopher like Descartes questioned whether any knowledge could be certain. A researcher, similarly, questions the reliability of sources or methods before drawing any conclusions. We can also talk about the questioning of assumptions. I wish the Vatniks would do this more, and often challenges what is taken for granted. Good research, especially when it comes to Ukraine, and especially when it comes to tank videos of destroyed tanks in Ukraine, also very much deals with stuff like this. It involves not accepting claims at face value, especially when it comes to videos like this, or like this, but examining underlying assumptions and seek a deeper understanding. So if common knowledge says that A, this Challenger 2 was destroyed by an AT-SAGR missile, a philosopher would ask why we believe that, and so would a researcher also ask this particular question. I also want to talk about a concept called the just war theory, concepts and core principles. So just war theory is rooted in thinkers like Augustine Hero-Grotius, who establishes moral or legal framework that governs war. So jus ad bellum is of course called the justice of war. It's just cause, legitimate authority, last resort, probability of success, etc., etc. Jus in bello, justice in war, which is proportionality in conduct, discrimination between combatants and non-combatants, and jus post bellum, justice after war. How does this relate to Ukraine? I'm getting to it. So a paradigm of a defensive just war. So as an unprovoked invasion by Russia, which I've talked about, Ukraine's struggle fits the classic just defense category. So jus in bello, Ukraine must adhere to proportional force and avoid civilian harm, which it has done kind of up to this point. Jus ad bellum criteria is fulfilled. There's a legitimate authority in Zelensky's government and a used to be reasonable chance of success. Also, Russian aggression, unjust by all counts. I want the Vatniks to pay close attention to this. According to scholars like Jeff McMahon, Russia's military actions are fundamentally impermissible. Russia's war lacks just cause, exceeds proportional response, and violates legitimate authority. There's also limits on Russian actions, limits that Russia has taken the liberty of ignoring. The war in Ukraine has also very much bled into a war on information, and what information we can classify as true, and what information we can classify as false. Also, this bit is a little bit unscripted. This is just me trying my best to articulate my thoughts as they come. When I go on X and I type in anything to do with Ukraine, I am assaulted by quite a lot of information. And some of this information may be led through either ethical or unethical means. Some of it may be true, but more of it is often untrue, as it only presents one side of the information that we already see. We may see a destroyed tank, and there are many ways that tank could have been destroyed, from a drone to a Sagar missile to maybe just a mobility kill. But in this fog of war, even the most basic information such as this has become obscure. So what am I trying to say here? Evaluate the information that you see online, either posted by Vatniks or posted otherwise. You need to come to your own conclusions about what you think is true, and often that comes with consulting multiple sources that all lead to the same thing. So how does this lead into philosophy? Well, let me get to that. One last point I want to make, consequentialism. So consequentialism judges the morality of actions based on their relative outcome. In the context of Ukraine, supporting the nation against aggression could be deemed ethical, if it leads to greater overall well-being and deters future violations of sovereignty. Conversely, actions that result in widespread suffering, such as prolonged conflict or civilian casualties, would be considered unethical. So using this logic, there is only one side to this conflict that has consistently bombed and or attacked civilian targets, from indiscriminate shelling to missile attacks, that being the Red Army and the Russians. They have consistently thrown caution and the Geneva Conventions, mind you, to the wind, and committed war crimes, and in fact it has gotten to a point where they don't even necessarily deny it anymore. A real showing of what Russia wants. In my opinion, it is a genocide against the Ukrainian people, not the elimination of justifiable military targets, in a special bullshit operation, as they might say, but the indiscriminate killings of civilians. The war in Ukraine presents a profound ethical dilemma, challenging us to evaluate the morality of our actions taken as both nations and as individuals. Analyzing this conflict through the lenses of deontological ethics and consequentialism provides distinct perspectives on the ethical considerations that are currently involved with respect to Ukraine. Okay, let us begin first with this: deontological ethics, duty and moral principles. Let's talk about categorical imperative, acting only according to maxims that one would will to become universal laws. This condemns non-intervention in the face of injustice. Thusly, the nations that have and continue to provide aid, including Canada, United Kingdom, Germany, France, among others, are all ethical in their decision to do so, no matter how much misled Vatniks may cry foul play. It is also here that I must emphasize that, at least in the face of the deontological process, that the United States has done by labeling Mr. Zelensky as a dictator, to openly criticizing him, to in fact arguing with the Ukrainian president in the White House, is most frankly the unethical decision that they have made in regards to this conflict. If I may, however, this also goes beyond just ethics. This deals with the very fabric of what is true. And before I get to one of my last points, I just want to throw in some extra concepts of philosophy that I feel like the Ukraine war relates to. First of all, you have the philosophical ideologues, Dugin and Eurasianism. So Russia's intellectual backing comes from Alex Dugin, whose messianistic, anti-liberal Eurasianist philosophy provided the ideological fuel for Putin's invasion. This war also reflects a old-school contest over civilization itself, in my opinion. Russian spiritual political narratives versus liberal Western universalism. We can see this from the different coverage that they've had of Ukraine. Finally, you can also talk about Kantian and rationalism and perpetual peace. Kant's vision of perpetual peace serves as both inspiration and framing. His warning that war destroys everything resonates powerfully in Ukraine. Kant's principles also challenge us to ask, can rationally agreed international institutions or federations prevent war altogether? In my opinion, no, it doesn't. Let's also talk about imperialism, decolonization, and national identity. This is a little bit more of a rant and a little bit more of a loose connection, but please do just hear me out. Ukraine is engaged in a decolonization process that has started actually since it became an independent country, removing Russian language symbols and rewriting history to forge a more unique national identity. From the Russian perspective, this conflict reflects a 22nd century imperial enterprise. i.e. Putin wants to create a second Soviet Union, which is why he invaded Ukraine, to take Ukraine back to create that new Soviet Union. If you look into how Putin came to power and some of his personal beliefs, it is very clear that he wants a second sort of Russian empire of sorts, if that makes sense. Of course, the Vatnik may then respond with, how about Ukrainian war crimes? First of all, do everyone a favor and please shut up for a second. Second of all, the fact that you are saying what's about proves that you are acknowledging that the Russians have committed war crimes, and have therefore outed yourself as no better than the ones who actually commit them. Thirdly, who committed them first? That's right. The Russians did when they attacked, or invaded. They proceeded to first shell civilian targets. So, is it not the Ukrainians' prerogative, therefore, to defend themselves in the most effective way? Even if we assume the Vatniks are true in this respect, their argument still holds no water next to how their logic stands up. This perspective also scrutinizes the role of international actors. For instance, businesses continuing to operate in Russia may inadvertently support the aggressor's economy, thereby exacerbating the conflict and its associated harms, though this is much less of a problem. While you're here, either reading or watching this, I'm going to make one final point on the monopoly that the Vatniks seem to have on morality, because they often have a tendency to finger wave the "but Ukrainian shellings are unethical" in your face, and the whole Ukrainian war crimes bruh argument as well. Here's my response. Why should the Russians have a monopoly on what is moral and what is not? Why should they have the right to grandstand the country that they invaded, mind you, and therefore dictate how the Ukrainians can't or can't respond? I call BS. The Vatniks are hypocrites. Okay, one last thing. The interest of a country, specifically the United States' response to Ukraine, or rather the Trump administration's response to Ukraine. I can understand and sympathize with the United States' desire for peace, and to end the billions of dollars that it has loaned Ukraine because it is no longer in the US's best interest to do so. However, what has me so frankly pissed off is the president's response to Ukraine, and the dismissal and outright antagonization of Ukraine's president, from calling him a dictator to an open fight in the White House. This is what I have problems with, because this isn't protecting your country's interest, it is outright bullying. Okay. One last point. I promise this is the last point I'm going to make in a video that's already too long. The last time that the world stood by and watched a dictatorial regime annex several nations and did nothing, it was called appeasement. And the Nazis didn't stop. Just as the Russians are not stopping. When are we going to learn that appeasement, simply put, doesn't work? Those who do not learn from history are doomed to repeat it. I want to thank you for watching this long rant and philosophy project 2-in-1. I also want to say that by the time this video is uploaded, information and the entire scope of the war might have changed. However, I hope that my points still stand. Slava Ukraine. Glory to Ukraine.
Русский военный корабль. Предлагаю сложить оружие и сдаться. Русский военный корабль, иди нахуй.
Пануєм і ми, браття,